It was a Friday night, and the city was shrouded in damp, silent darkness. The rain fell incessantly, turning the streets into a maze of glittering puddles and distorted reflections. As the clock approached midnight, Sarah was finally leaving her office, exhausted after a long day at work. Her coworkers had left early, and she was alone on that dark night. She stuffed her laptop into her bag and walked down the stairs of the office building, feeling a shiver run down her spine as the automatic lights turned off behind her, leaving her in an unsettling gloom. The night guard sat drowsily in her booth, and the sound of rain hitting the windows was the only noise echoing through the empty lobby. With umbrella in hand, Sarah left the building and faced the storm that raged outside. She didn't have a car, so her only option was to find a taxi to take her home. With her index finger extended, she waved at any passing taxi. Rain ran down the taxi's windshield as it approached and finally stopped next to Sarah. The driver, a middle-aged man with a hat that hid part of his face, rolled down the passenger window. "Good evening, lady. Where are you going?" asked the driver with a monotone voice and an indifferent expression. Sarah, in a hurry to escape the freezing rain, gave her address and got into the taxi. The interior of the vehicle was dimly lit, and the aroma of cheap air freshener wafted through the air. She settled her bag on her lap and sighed in relief that she had finally found a ride home. The taxi started to move, and Sarah looked out the window, watching the city lights blurred by the rain. However, something bothered her. She had noticed that the driver was not taking the most direct route to his destination. Her discomfort grew as he made a series of strange turns, taking her away from familiar areas. "Sir, I think we're going in the wrong direction," she said, trying to remain calm. The driver remained silent, his expression unchanged, as if he hadn't heard. He simply continued driving, ignoring Sarah's directions. She felt a chill run down her spine as the taxi drove further and further away from its intended destination. Her cell phone, which was in the pocket of her purse, started ringing, and she picked it up, hoping it was a message from a friend or family member concerned about her delay. However, upon checking the screen, she saw that there was no signal. The heavy rain must have been interfering with the reception. Sarah tried to call the taxi company, but the phone didn't work. She was completely isolated, trapped in a stranger's taxi that was taking her to an unknown place. Her heart started to beat faster, and she felt a growing fear come over her. As the taxi made its way through the muddy streets, Sarah became increasingly apprehensive. She looked out the window, trying to recognize her surroundings, but nothing seemed familiar. The driver was not following the route she had indicated, and this made her deeply uneasy. "Sir, please stop the taxi." "I want to get out," she asked, her voice shaking. The driver finally responded, but her voice had a strange quality, almost like an icy whisper. "You can't get off now, my dear. This is one trip you can't interrupt." Sarah felt a shiver run through her entire body. She gripped the strap of her bag tightly, realizing something was terribly wrong. She wondered if she should try to get out of the taxi, but fear paralyzed her. The taxi continued moving forward, deeper and deeper into the darkness. Sarah began to notice that there were no other cars on the road, no signs of life in the surrounding houses. She was completely isolated, at the mercy of the sinister driver. "Please tell me where we're going," she insisted, her eyes fixed on the driver through the rearview mirror. He finally looked at her, and her eyes had a disturbing gleam. "You will find out soon, my dear. Tonight is the start of something you will never forget." The driver's response only increased Sarah's fear. She was starting to panic, and her hands were shaking. She knew that she couldn't trust him, and that she needed to find a way out of this situation. As the taxi drove through the rainy night, that's when she noticed something strange on the bench next to her. There was a knife shining dimly in the overhead light. Sarah swallowed hard, but didn't hesitate. She took it and hid it in her coat, determined to use it if necessary. Sarah's fear continued to grow with every minute she spent on that ominous journey. She didn't know where she was being taken, but she was determined to fight for your life and find a way to escape that macabre taxi. The taxi continued to move forward into the rainy night, its engine rumbling like an ominous sound in the darkness. Sarah, sitting in the back seat with the knife hidden in her coat, knew she was in a dangerous situation. She tried to remain calm, but the uncertainty of what was to come tormented her. "Please tell me what's going on." Why are we going to an unknown place? What do you want from me? She asked in a shaky voice. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his eyes now shining with an evil gleam. You will find out soon enough, my dear. You are special, and tonight is the start of something you will never forget. The driver's response only increased Sarah's fear. She knew that she couldn't trust him, and that she needed to find a way to escape. As the taxi continued on its way, she continued to examine the interior of the vehicle for anything that could help her. The minutes dragged by, and the incessant rain seemed to create a barrier between her and the outside world. Her cell phone remained without signal, making any attempt to ask for help impossible. The feeling of impotence oppressed her. It was then that something caught Sarah's attention. She noticed that the taxi had left the city behind and was moving along a deserted road, surrounded by dense forest. She didn't recognize the area and began to fear the worst. The driver finally broke the silence, his cold, sinister voice filling the car. We're here, my dear. It's time for you to find out what's in store for you. The taxi stopped in an isolated place, in the middle of that dark and humid forest. Sarah looked out the window and saw twisted trees and unsettling shadows. She felt a chill run down her spine, knowing that she was in an extremely dangerous situation. Sarah, full of fear and determination, pulled out the knife she had found and pointed it in the direction of the driver. Stay away from me. I won't allow you to do anything to me. The driver looked surprised for a moment, but then his sinister smile returned. You're smarter than I thought. But it doesn't matter. Tonight, you belong to us. At this moment, the taxi was surrounded by a series of sinister figures that emerged from the shadows of the forest. There were men and women dressed in black, with masks that hid their faces. They surrounded the car, blocking any chance of escape. Sarah's heart was beating wildly, and she knew she was in imminent danger. With a quick movement, she opened the taxi door and ran into the dark forest. She could hear the footsteps of her pursuers behind her, but she was determined not to be captured. The rain continued to fall, drenching her as she ran through the forest. She had no idea where she was going, but she knew she needed to find help. She kept running, with the sound of her pursuers getting closer and closer. Sarah was now in a desperate fight for survival, her heart beating like a drum, her mind working frantically in search of a way out. She didn't know what awaited her in that dark forest, but she was willing to face anything to escape the clutches of the sinister strangers who were chasing her. Sarah ran through the dark, damp forest, the freezing rain soaking her clothes and hair. Her heart beat wildly, and fear drove her forward. She could hear the footsteps of her pursuers behind her, but her determination to escape was unshakable. The forest was filled with twisted trees and dense bushes, creating a dark and disorienting maze. Sarah had no idea where she was going, but she knew she needed to find help as quickly as possible. The pursuers continued to approach, their whispering, sinister voices filling the forest. There's no point running, my dear. You can't escape us. Sarah couldn't let despair overwhelm her. She looked around for some hiding place, some way to lose her pursuers. That's when she saw a dense clump of bushes to her left. Without hesitation, she darted towards the bushes and dove into them as quickly as she could, hiding in their damp, leafy interior. She held her breath, trying to make as little noise as possible as her pursuers passed by. She heard their footsteps and dark whispers approaching, and her heart felt like it was about to explode. But, miraculously, they passed by her, without noticing her presence. Sarah remained still, waiting until the sounds faded away, before she emerged from her hiding place. Cautiously, she continued her journey through the forest. She was far from safe, but at least she had managed to temporarily lose her pursuers. The rain continued to fall, making the forest even more gloomy and inhospitable. Sarah didn't know how long it had been since she left the taxi, but she knew she couldn't stop. She needed to find help or a way out of that ominous forest. As she continued her frantic run, her thoughts turned to what could have happened to the taxi driver and his accomplices. She was convinced they were involved in something much more sinister than a simple taxi ride. She wondered if there were other victims, if anyone knew of their desperate situation. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Sarah saw a faint light through the trees. She approached it cautiously and saw that it was a road. She knew she had to get out of the forest and find help as quickly as possible. She ran toward the road, the rain now mixed with tears of relief. She came across a slowly passing car and waved desperately. The driver stopped, and Sarah ran towards the vehicle, begging for help. The driver of the car was an older man with kind, concerned eyes. He offered Sarah a warm blanket and called the police immediately after hearing her terrifying story. As she waited for the police to arrive, Sarah felt a sense of relief mixed with trauma. She knew she had escaped immediate danger, but the terror of that ominous night would never leave her. She hoped her story might lead to the capture of the sinister strangers who had stalked her, and she wondered how many other people might be in danger. The dark, dank forest had been her nightmare scenario, but now she was finally safe, surrounded by the light and help she so desperately needed.